things related to white people aren't good. Donald Trump has opened up the doorway to white people starting to stand up and be like, God, I'm tired of being ashamed of being white, or whatever the case is. I have never experienced it in Ecuador, and I don't experience it in Colombia, where white people...
You mean shame here in the United States?
Yeah, in the United States.
Well, yeah, I mean, or if anyone says there's anything about my whiteness that makes me a certain way, I have a tough time just understanding that.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope all is good wherever you are. In today's video, we're going to look at a small section of a very long live stream from Dr. Sam Richards' university lectures. I love his channel, and I like what he brings to the table. I'm not saying I agree with the guy all the time, and that's not the point here. The point is that we should be having these discussions, especially in universities. He's asking the question, he's causing people to do some critical thinking instead of just indoctrinating them with some leftist ideology. And even though I don't agree with him all the time, props to him for, in this day and age, being an older white dude talking about racism in universities. Because I know for a fact there's a lot of academics out there that would be scared to approach these topics for fear of being canceled or fired. This is a video where they talk about racism, white pride, white privilege, and should you be ashamed of being white. Let's get into the video.
They talk about it, how they are, et cetera, et cetera. What do you notice? What stands out for you?
I think there's a lot more emphasis on being white here when you meet someone.
When you say emphasis, you mean like people, they bring it into the conversation?
Yeah, yeah.
Does anybody want to add on to what Rebecca just said about Americans sort of bringing whiteness into the conversation?
Well, I was going to say, I feel like, especially now in the United States, people bring race into pretty much everything, whether we like it or not, and whiteness happens to be one of those things that they just bring in. And I don't necessarily think it's just white people who talk about whiteness. I feel like everybody talks about whiteness. What
are the common things that you hear people saying about whiteness here in the United States?
Well, I mean, one of the, I don't know whether to call it a good thing, but one of the things about social media and being connected all the time is that you can hear people who are extreme on both sides. So, you can hear people about, you can hear people in God knows where they are talking about how great it is to be white and, how great they feel being white and how whiteness is awesome and everything. And then on the other end, obviously you can hear people talking about how, they view whiteness as something not necessarily to be proud of.
It seems to me that one common thread here in the United States among white people is that most white people have learned or don't feel proud about being white. It's more shame than pride here.
It's because how other countries kind of view America in a way. So like, I don't know, often Americans are kind of posed as like, I don't know, obese, white people that just sit around and like do nothing all day. So I feel like maybe that has something to do with it. It's like, oh, I'm just American type of thing. It's
We have a really unique history in that it's Europeans that came and started creating this concept of race, because race is very much a European created concept. And the development of race as a term goes right along with slavery. Slavery has always existed in the world. There's always been slavery. Slavery is just taking somebody from some group and saying, you're going to now be part of our group and you're going to work for us. You're going to be part of us. You're going to do something I want you to do. And I'm going to pay you very little money or pay you no money at all. And I'm going to force you into some kind of relationships of some type of bondage. That's always existed. And always existed because life is really brutal and short, man. And you need other people to be part of your groups, especially the smaller the groups are. And most of human history is hunting and gathering groups. You need other people to be part of you. So when you meet another group and you can conquer them, they become part of you, but then they become part of your group, right? They don't just become outsiders. They really often become. So the person that could be a slave very quickly is not a slave anymore. But sometimes they really truly are slaves, and based on whatever characteristics you could have. But Europeans did this thing that people had not done before, which is enslave people on the basis of their physical characteristics and where they were from. So if you're going to go to Africa, you're going to go to this continent, you're going to take these people and you're going to bring them to the Americas, and you're going to say, we're going to force you to work for us. You're going to force you to be in bondage here. You have to have some kind of reason to put them in bondage. And the reason then becomes, well, you're inferior. And we know you're inferior because you look like this.
So when it comes to the slave trade, right, slavery tracks back to 11,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, something of the sorts. And this was happening in a lot of civilizations. Contrary to what the university teachers these days would tell you, this is not a America thing. Okay, nobody talks about slavery in Africa, the trans-Saharan slave trade, the Red Sea slave trade, the Indian Ocean slave trade. Slavery was happening in civilizations, including China, Babylonia back in the day, Persia, ancient Israel, Greece, ancient India, in the Arab world on insane scales. This is one thing that nobody talks about too when they talk about the slave trade. Sure, we can talk about the slave trade that the African people enslaved their own people to sell them to America. We can talk about that. But we should also teach people that there was a massive slave trade going east. And this is a massive omission of history when university teachers talk about this. We think there's just an American horror story. And it's something that Thomas Sowell talks about in his books when he says, you hear the word war, you don't think of any specific country, right? If you close your eyes, you can probably picture a lot of countries going at war. Wars happen since the dawn of time. It is what it is. But when you ask, let's say, American people about slavery, all they can think about, and even in other places of the world, is they think about slavery in America. War is not looked at to be a particularly Western sin, but slavery is. Most kids would have no idea about the slave trade going east. They have no idea that the Arab world enslaved 14 million Africans starting in, the 8th century. They have no idea about the history of slavery in China and Korea, the Aztec Empire, or pretty much every empire for the past 10,000 years. And especially when you talk to North American people, they have very little idea, younger generation, about the slave trade going east. And if anybody's wondering, wouldn't they have descendants if there was this many black slaves in the Arab world? The Arabs castrated them. That's why they have no descendants. The word for slave and the word for a black person is abed. It's the same word. But I think because of the way people are taught and all these leftist ideologies that have happened in the last few years, white people in the United States are being told that they have hereditary sin. And that's a big one because it is based strictly on their skin color. And I would find it absolutely repulsive. And I hope all of you listening would as well. If there was any school of thought in America that had any grasp on public attention that said black people were born into evil because of something their ancestors did. Like they were born with the mark of Cain upon them or something. That would be a disgusting, vicious way to try to demoralize a group of people. And what this does to a group is it will take a lot of the great achievements of their lives and lessen them because for some reason they have to atone for something they didn't do. But nobody talks about this because white people are the group. And I get that it's easier to punch up. It's always easier to attack the majority. You can be racist to both sides, and no matter how you cut it, racism is racism. Right? You're racist to a white person. If you say a white person's born with hereditary sin because they're white, that's a racist thing to say. If you said that about a black person, you'd be called a racist bigot. Let's get back to the video.
And so that just hadn't happened in history, just had not happened. So we created this really wild history here. So the whole race conversation, when we talk about white people, it's all connected in that way, right? So now the question is, this is what Americans are grappling with. So what do you all see? You can't stand up and just be like, hey, I want to talk about my whiteness, because whiteness comes along with a certain kind of shame or a certain kind of it's not good to be white.
There's definitely a component here where, there were people in the past in this country who maybe put a bad name on being proud of being white because they were being proud of being white for the completely wrong reasons. They were like, I'm white and I'm better than everybody else.
Yep.
So I think it's I don't know if it's understandable, but there certainly is a feeling that if anyone who's white expresses their pride, or maybe not even pride, just the fact that they're white, it's almost like wait, are you trying to say that you're like them, that you're you're proud of because you're white and because everybody else is inferior, or what's the reason,
Right. So if you any acknowledgement of some kind of pride to be white is pride to be a part of the conquering group. And that's seen, and you can't do that. But you could be proud to be Irish, right? And that's okay. As many Americans are. Irish are really quite.
Which is also interesting because, as you just said, I feel like in Europe, we judge America for being whites, being racist or whatever, but I think a lot of people don't know that it actually stemmed from Europe. But people in Europe are I'm proud to be Irish, I'm proud to be British, but when America do it, it's wrong because we think that that's where racism comes from, but that's not actually where it comes from.
Okay, right. Okay, so Americans can be, I'm proud to be American, but proud to be white is something else. Yeah. Bro, so this is in Australia, right? Like you've had the public shaming of white Australians.
I wouldn't necessarily say like it's very similar to America, and I would say kind of building off what you were saying, like I've never really heard someone say I'm proud to be white there, but the line that comes out loud is I'm proud to be Australian, which I think is similar to here. And I've always wondered if that's extending from like, is that because we see our normal person, like I mentioned earlier, as being a white? So we just say that, we assume that by saying that, it's like an indirect way. But I think it's very similar along the lines of America. Like coming here, I didn't see it as like a big difference in how it doesn't really come up a lot. Like I haven't heard anyone here particularly say, but you said, or back home, for instance.
But but back home, is there kind of a shaming that white people experience? Like because dude, let's be clear. What happened to the Aboriginal peoples in Australia is similar to what happened to indigenous American Indians here. I mean, the slaughter, really a genocide, right? The killing. So when you say I'm proud to be Australian, do people link that with, yeah, but dude, the Australians, who are mostly white, because that's what you're talking about, when people say that, are they, A, including the indigenous peoples into that analysis, into that group? And B, are they saying it with an awareness of what the white Australians did to the Aboriginal people?
I'm not somebody who's as proud to be white. I guess I had nothing to do with my skin color. I was just born with it. So it's not something I'm necessarily proud of or not proud of. I just don't think about it. And I think I grew up that way because when I was growing up, nobody cared. This is a very new phenomenon that these Marxist ideas have come back. I had black friends when I was growing up, still do. Two of my brothers are adopted, they're black. I had Asian friends, I had South American friends. Nobody cared. We're just cool people. But these days, everybody cares because you can say something like, oh, I'm going to shop from a black business, or you can be proud to be black. But if you say you're proud to be white, that's somewhat, immoral. If you say, imagine you said you're going to shop at only white businesses. We have to remember, too, that in the past, for those of you who might have Irish ancestors, going back far enough in Europe, they were enslaved by the English. And now people are just looking at them like they're the same thing. Their ancestors experienced slavery as well. But these days, there's a strange war on white people. And it's strange to me, but it's absolutely the case. Racism against white people in today's day and age, in 2024, is rightly deemed to be totally permissible. Racism to any other group, though, totally impermissible in the public square. No exceptions. You can only be racist towards white. You cannot say the same things about any other group that you can say about white people. And this is pretty much across the Western world. This is America, this is Britain, this is Canada. If you said something like what you could say about white people to another group, in some places you could even be locked up for hate speech. And in our country, this is instilled through the media, through academics, through the military, and at all levels of society, white people are seen as being a problem. And a problem for whom a remedy for some reason must be found. But they will hide that in saying terms like these people are saying. They say whiteness. They won't actually say, oh, white people. They'll say, oh, whiteness. Well, I'm not racist against you for being white, but whiteness is the problem. And then we have maniacs out there. If you guys know Robin DiAngelo, she wrote a book called White Fragility. And she's white. She's a white lady. This thing sold millions of copies after George Floyd passed away. And in her book, she even said that there is no good form of being white. No good form of being white. That you cannot escape it. You just have to accept it and atone for your sin. Like I mentioned before, like you have hereditary sin. You cannot identify as not being white. And if you are white, you are evil. Now, how would anybody know what it's like to be white? What the hell does that even mean anyway? But imagine you wrote a book and you said something like, there's no good form of blackness. You'd be labeled a big racist, wouldn't you? And you would be. But that's the point. This is reverse racism. This is what CTR is, a critical race theory. I mean, talking about white privilege in the West has become some racist trope. You can say white tears. God forbid you would say black tears. I remember in January 6th that the term white rage was going on around a lot in the media. This attempt to pathologize being white. White rage. And in front of Congress, I remember General Milley, the chair of the Joint Chief of Staff in the United States, he testified in Congress saying he would make a bigger effort to understand the issue that is white rage. He wanted to learn more about white rage. So let me tell you that again. If he said black rage, is this guy still employed? And I want to let everybody know, I'm not trying to say that white people today have it harder than black hat people had it in the past. I'm just saying, let's stop competing for who is the biggest victim here. If saying things like black rage, if that is considered racist, so is saying the opposite towards white people? Let's get back to the video.
I would say for us, it's the reason people can say it differently than here is because not as many people know our history of what happened and the negative connotations associated with basically, and it's not always true. Like, there was a ton of immigration to Australia in the late 20th century, but that's kind of what white Australian extends from. And obviously, there's a huge islander population, people from Papua New Guinea, Maoris from New Zealand, and I think there's cultural diversity in that as well, who come in and they're just as Australian as anyone else. But I do think that there's a negative undertone associated with, like, I think our best instance is Australia Day. The day is celebrating, like, when the English arrived in America. It's like our equivalent of 4th of July. And it's technically celebrating our arrival is celebrating the basically annihilation of
when the English arrived in Australia.
Yeah,
which is celebrating the annihilation of
basically
the beginning
of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think
do people talk about that?
It's become a topic like more and more in the last 10 years. Like, I know there were protests on Australia Day. Like, there's protests on Australia Day.
Yeah, I was watching some last year actually on that. But here, to be clear, right, in the United States, it's not Native Americans don't have the power. The indigenous Americans don't really have the power to push that conversation. It's Black Americans that have had the power just to really critique white people. But like, if you say I'm proud to be white, the next statement by people critiquing that isn't, or I'm proud to be American, isn't from the perspective of Native Americans. It's from the perspective of Black Americans in slavery. And you guys didn't have that. You just had the indigenous people who you can kind of push to the side more easily. Things related to white people aren't good. They're not necessarily bad. They're just not good. Donald Trump has opened up the doorway to white people starting to stand up and be like, God, I'm tired of being ashamed of being white, or whatever the case is. So do you guys see any of that here? Go ahead. Yeah.
I think that, like, especially in Ireland, like, people that don't know that much about America will kind of judge America as a whole by people like Donald Trump or people that stand up for whatever. But I think, like, when you get here and you get to know people, actually, like, from my experience, like, American people are some of the nicest people I've ever met, and that's for all races. So I think that, like, from smaller countries like Ireland and especially other countries in Europe, that a lot of white people or just America in general get based off of the kind of bigger names and things that are seen in the media, but they actually don't know what it's like to be over here and, like, live the lifestyle and live and your best friends be American. And I still think, like, even when I go home and I talk to people at home, like, they still have the same stereotypes about Americans, and it's just like any other stereotype in the world.
And what's their stereotype of white Americans in particular?
They're full of themselves and whatever, but, like,
white Americans are.
Yeah. But not in the sense of, like, being white or anything, just in the sense of, like, just that's just the stereotype that they have.
Yeah, of white Americans.
I don't remember Donald Trump ever telling people that he was proud to be white or anything of the sorts, but proud to be American, 100%. That was something that's been lost for a while. For some reason, if you were proud to be American, you were just looked at as white supremacist. And look, keep in mind, a lot of Black people in America are proud to be American. Post-BLM riots in January 6th, the American flag became this weird symbol by the left of racism, which is crazy. Being proud of a skin color is odd to me, but if you want to be proud of your country, sure. And listen, white people, European people, Western nerds have given a lot to the world, right? The computer that you're on today, satellites, spacecraft, the printing press, eyeglasses, the microwave. 95% or more of medical advancements were done by Western people, white people. 95% of life-saving pharmaceuticals, the discovery of DNA. I can go on with this. The bulk of mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, astronomy, sea navigation, genetics, the microscope, nuclear energy, refrigeration, wireless tech. The left always like to shit on white people a lot because it's acceptable, but we have to keep in mind that our society there, because of the values of the West, the best free market that ever lived, if we didn't have these great people that invented all this stuff, we'd be stuck in the Stone Age. Let's get back to the video.
I want to go back to this kind of shaming. I have never experienced it in Ecuador, and I don't experience it in Colombia, where white people.
You mean shame here in the United States?
Yeah, in the United States.
Well, yeah, I mean, I certainly see. It's almost like there's something inherent about being white that makes you a certain way by default, and then it's just like it's hard to deal with that in the sense that you're your own individual person, and there's nothing necessarily about my whiteness that makes me a certain way.
Yeah.
Or if anyone says there's anything about my whiteness that makes me a certain way, I have a tough time just understanding that, because it's not something that I chose. It's not something that any white person chose or any person of any color chose.
No, but there's a way of talking about it, right? If I talk to white people and I say, hey, tell me about yourself a little bit. Going back 20 years, 30 years, nobody would ever say, oh yeah, well, I'm white. It's just like, it's not even part of the consciousness. It's just like, it's like drinking the water. You don't really notice that you're white. It's just not part of it. It's not in the conversation to even acknowledge it. You don't look at a mirror and recognize that what you're seeing is a white face here. But in the past 10, 15 years for sure, there's this greater awareness among white Americans that they're actually white Americans. They're not just Americans, they're white Americans, right? And that's not necessarily a good thing. Like, you got to be able to follow that up with, yeah, and white people have done some really awful things, and I'm privileged. Like, you learn that, like, right off the bat. Like, yeah, I'm white. Yeah, I'm privileged. I have white privilege. Do you guys talk about white privilege in Australia?
I wouldn't say as much.
You notice that here.
It's more talked about here, and I wonder if it persists more here than it does, but I don't think I can fully comment on the extent in which it persists. It obviously exists in Australia,
Yeah.
and it still exists, but also it's definitely, from as long as I've been here, more talked about than I ever talked about it back home with anyone.
Yeah, like, you've never talked about it back home with anyone? You don't talk about white people don't talk about their privilege?
I wouldn't say it's not talked about, it's just not talked about on the same scale.
Yeah, I got you. Okay. Yeah. For here, the scale is just, my God, if you have a race group, like if you put a diverse group of people in a circle and you have them start talking about race, the white people are going to just start with the privilege, unless they're part of Young Americans for Freedom or conservative or something. They're immediately going to just talk about the privilege. Like, that's just part of it, and you can't not. You can't talk about being white without talking about your privilege.
I don't really see it at all in Israel, to be honest.
That'll be it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I love these conversations. I love watching these debates. I love the classroom stuff. Sam Richard, his channel's amazing. I got another video I'm going to be doing in a day or two on critical race theory from his channel. I thought that conversation was quite interesting. But that is it. If you enjoyed this video, again, please subscribe to the channel. Leave a thumbs up on the video. Comment down below. I'll catch you all in the next video. Peace out, everybody.